March 24th, 1945, 30,000 feet above Berlin. The Messerschmitt Me. 262. Jet streaked through the frozen sky like a silver blade, its twin engines screaming a promise of invincibility. Luftwaffe pilot ginned beneath his oxygen mask, spotting the lumbering B-17 bombers ahead, fat with explosives and vulnerable as cattle. Then he saw the escorts. Red tails. His grin faltered. The radio had warned him about these pilots, but he hadn't believed it. Now, banking hard as tracer fire laced past his canopy, he realized the reports were true. And in that instant, high above the dying Reich, he understood that Germany's myth of supremacy had shattered long before the bombs ever fell. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, if you're enjoying this journey through history, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from viewers around the world. Whether you're in Texas, Tokyo, or anywhere in between, welcome to a story that changed the course of history. Now, let's continue. The year was 1941 when the impossible began. Deep in the Alabama heat, on a military airfield that wasn't supposed to exist, young black men climbed into cockpits they'd been told they'd never touch. Tuskegee Army Airfield sat like a challenge thrown down in the heart of Jim Crow country. The surrounding towns didn't want them there. Many white officers openly doubted they could learn to fly, and across the ocean, in briefing rooms scattered throughout occupied Europe, German pilots heard rumors of America's experiment and laughed. The idea that black pilots could match the skill of the Luftwaffe seemed absurd to men raised on Nazi ideology. They had been taught since childhood that they belonged to a master race. The thought of facing black Americans in combat was dismissed as propaganda or desperation. But the men at Tuskegee weren't interested in arguments or convincing speeches. They were there to fly. Every morning before dawn, they assembled in formation, their boots polished to mirrors despite the dust that coated everything else. The training was brutal by design. Instructors pushed them harder than white cadets at other bases, knowing that any failure would be used as proof of inferiority. The heat inside those cockpits was suffocating, the Alabama sun turning metal frames into ovens. Yet the men endured. They mastered the PT-17 Stearman, that rattling biplane that forgave nothing. They learned to navigate by stars and landmarks, to handle spins and stalls, to land in crosswinds that could flip an aircraft like a toy. One cadet later remembered his first solo flight, the moment the wheels left the runway and he was truly alone in the sky. "I wasn't just flying an airplane," he wrote home. "I was flying above everything that ever tried to keep me down." The pressure was immense and unrelenting. Each man knew he carried more than his own dreams. If one failed, critics would say it proved their race couldn't handle the complexity of modern warfare. If they succeeded, they might crack open a door that had been welded shut since the nation's founding. That burden welded them together. In the evenings, after hours of formation drills and gunnery practice, they gathered in their segregated quarters and talked about what was coming. They knew the war was waiting. They knew they'd have to prove themselves not just in training, but in combat, where mistakes were measured in graves. And they knew that even their own side doubted them. White bomber crews had already begun whispering that they didn't want black escorts. Some officers openly requested not to fly with the Tuskegee experiment. By early 1944, the 332nd Fighter Group had completed training and shipped out to Italy. They landed at Ramitelli Airfield, a scraped-together base near the Adriatic coast, where the wind carried salt and the smell of diesel fuel. The accommodations were rough canvas tents, muddy pathways, cold rations more often than hot meals. But compared to what they'd faced back home, the physical discomfort meant little. What stung was the reception. Other fighter groups eyed them with skepticism. Ground crews whispered. Bomber pilots requested different escorts. The 332nd had arrived in a war zone only to find that the battle for respect would be just as fierce as any dogfight. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. understood this better than anyone. A West Point graduate who had endured 4 years of silence, classmates refusing to speak to him except on official duty, Davis carried himself with granite discipline. He gathered his men on their first morning at Ramitelli and delivered a message that would define their mission. "We are not here to chase glory," he said. "We are here to bring bombers home. Every plane we escort is a chance to prove what we already know, that skill has no color. Stay with the bombers. Do not break formation for personal kills. Prove it through action, not words." His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was steel. The men understood. They would be judged not by their intentions, but by the number of bombers that returned safely. The early missions were tense. Imagine climbing into a P-51 Mustang at dawn, the engine coughing to life as ground crews gave the thumbs up. The cockpit smelled of oil and leather. Your breath fogged the inside of your oxygen mask as you climbed to 20,000 feet, where the temperature dropped to 30 below zero. Ahead, the bomber formations stretched like a slow-moving constellation of metal and fire. You took your position on their flank, scanning the horizon for the glint of enemy fighters. Then the radio crackled. "Bandits, 3 o'clock high." Your heart kicked. You tightened your grip on the stick. And when the Messerschmitts dove, screaming out of the sun with cannons blazing, you didn't think about proving anyone wrong. You just flew. What set the Red Tails apart wasn't just skill, it was discipline. Other escort groups sometimes peeled off to chase German fighters, racking up personal kill counts that looked good in reports but left bombers exposed. The 332nd didn't. When enemy fighters attacked, the Red Tails stayed tight on the bombers, forcing the Germans to fight through them to reach their targets. It wasn't flashy. It didn't always result in high numbers of confirmed kills, but it brought the bombers home. And slowly, grudgingly, bomber crews began to notice. After a few missions escorted by the Red Tails, gunners started to relax when they saw that flash of red on the tails of their escorts. Pilots who had requested different groups began asking for the 332nd by name. "If I see red tails," one B-17 pilot wrote, "I know I'm coming back." Meanwhile, across enemy lines, the laughter was fading. German pilots had expected easy victories against pilots they assumed were inferior. Instead, they found themselves facing coordinated, disciplined opponents who refused to break formation. Luftwaffe after-action reports began noting the unusual tenacity of these escorts. Some German aces, men with dozens of kills, admitted grudging respect. One captured pilot, interrogated after being shot down, expressed surprise when he learned his opponent had been a Tuskegee Airman. "I did not expect such precision," he said quietly. The myth was crumbling, one mission at a time. By the summer of 1944, the Red Tails had flown dozens of escort missions deep into German-held territory. They faced the best the Luftwaffe had, veteran aces flying the sleek Bf-109s and rugged FW-190s. The skies over Austria, Hungary, and southern Germany became proving grounds. On one mission over Ploiești, a formation of German fighters hit the bomber stream hard, diving through the formations with cannons blazing. The Red Tails met them head-on. Captain Roscoe Brown later described the chaos the sky filled with tracers, the radio alive with shouts, the gut-wrenching sight of a bomber exploding in a ball of fire. But the 332nd held their line. They turned back wave after wave of attacks. When the bombers reached their target and turned for home, fewer had been lost than on any previous raid over that target. The numbers didn't lie. Then came the jets. In late 1944, Germany began deploying the Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. It was terrifyingly fast, capable of speeds no Allied piston-engine fighter could match. For bomber crews, the 262 was a nightmare, a silver blur that could tear through formations before gunners could track it. The Red Tails knew immediately that their tactics would have to evolve. You couldn't chase a jet in level flight, but jets were vulnerable during their attack runs, when they slowed to line up on bombers, and during climbs back to altitude. the Tuskegee pilots adapted. They used teamwork, positioning themselves to intercept jets at their most vulnerable moments. And incredibly, they began scoring kills against these futuristic machines. Roscoe Brown became the first Tuskegee Airman to down an Me-262. It happened on March 24, 1945, during the mission to Berlin. Brown spotted the jet lining up on a bomber formation and pushed his Mustang into a steep dive, building speed. Timing was everything. As the jet slowed for its attack run, Brown closed the distance and opened fire. His bullets stitched across the jet's fuselage. Smoke poured from one engine. The 262 rolled, trailing fire, and fell from the sky. Brown's voice crackled over the radio. "Splash one jet!" The disbelief was audible in the responses. A piston engine fighter had just downed Germany's most advanced weapon. By the end of that mission, the Red Tails had destroyed 3 Me-262s. The impossible had become routine. That mission to Berlin was the 332nd's crowning achievement. Hundreds of bombers pushed deep into the heart of the Reich, escorted by the Red Tails through wave after wave of German defenses. Flak bursts turned the sky black. German fighters swarmed from every direction, throwing everything they had left into the fight. The Red Tails didn't waver. They stayed with the bombers through the chaos, through the fear, through the exhaustion of hours at high altitude in freezing cockpits. When the formation finally turned for home, the bomber crews counted their losses. Astonishingly few. The 332nd had done it. They had escorted a major raid to Berlin and brought nearly everyone home. For that mission, the 332nd Fighter Group was awarded the Distinguished Unit Citation, one of the highest honors a military unit can receive. The statistics tell a story that words can barely capture. Over the course of 179 escort missions, the Red Tails lost only 27 bombers to enemy fighters, an unprecedented record. Other groups lost far more. The 332nd destroyed over 100 enemy aircraft in the air and another 150 on the ground during strafing runs. They flew more than 15,000 sorties, and they did it while facing not only the enemy in the sky but prejudice on the ground. Even as their record grew undeniable, they still encountered segregated facilities, officers who spoke down to them, and the daily indignities of a military that hadn't fully accepted them. But they kept flying. They kept bringing the bombers home, and slowly, undeniably, respect replaced ridicule. One bomber pilot, a white lieutenant from Ohio, later wrote about the moment he realized what the Red Tails meant. His formation had been hit hard over Germany, 2 planes already lost, fighters swarming like hornets. Then he saw the Mustangs with Red Tails slide into position, their movements precise and calm. "They didn't leave us," he wrote. "No matter how bad it got, they stayed. I owed my life to men I'd been taught to look down on. That changed me." Stories like his spread through the 15th Air Force. Crews who had once requested different escorts now specifically asked for the 332nd. The men who had been laughed at were now the most requested fighter group in Italy. Back at Ramitelli, the mood was a mixture of pride and grief. Every mission brought losses. Empty bunks told silent stories. Pilots who didn't return were mourned quietly, their belongings packed and sent home. The men carried that weight every time they climbed into their cockpits. They fought not just for victory, but for each other, and for the brothers who'd been lost. In the evenings, they gathered around campfires or in the mess tent, swapping stories, replaying missions, laughing at close calls, and sitting in silence when words weren't enough. That bond, forged in fire and discipline, became their greatest strength. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, Ramitelli erupted in celebration. Flares lit the night sky. Men embraced, shouted, wept. The war in Europe was over. They had survived. But even in that moment of triumph, there was uncertainty. What kind of America awaited them? They had fought for a country that still denied them basic rights. They had proven themselves in the most unforgiving arena imaginable. Would it matter? Would their service change anything? Or would they return to the same segregation, the same second-class status, the same quiet humiliations? The answer was complicated. When the Tuskegee Airmen returned home, they were still treated as second-class citizens in many places. Signs still read, "Whites Only," in bus stations and restaurants across the South. Officers who had earned distinguished flying crosses were denied entry into clubs. The contradiction was bitter. Heroes abroad, strangers at home. But their story had already begun to change the conversation. Newspapers wrote about their exploits. Bomber crews spoke publicly about the black pilots who saved their lives. And within the military itself, pressure mounted to end segregation. In 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, desegregating the armed forces. The Red Tails hadn't just won battles in the sky, they had cracked the foundation of institutional racism in the military. Their legacy extended far beyond policy. For young black Americans growing up in the shadow of Jim Crow, the Tuskegee Airmen were proof that excellence could not be denied. They had faced ridicule, doubt, and systemic barriers, and they had answered with action. Their victories weren't just tactical, they were moral. They showed that courage and discipline could overcome prejudice. They proved that character is defined not by the color of one's skin, but by the choices one makes under pressure. And they left behind a lesson as relevant now as it was then. Respect isn't given, it's earned. And it's earned through consistency, loyalty, and refusing to quit when the world tells you that you can't. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. rose to the rank of general, the first black general in the history of the United States Air Force. His calm authority, his precision in the cockpit, and his refusal to be broken by prejudice became the living embodiment of everything the Tuskegee Airmen had fought for. Other pilots from Tuskegee went on to become educators, judges, engineers, and community leaders, carrying the lessons of Ramitelli Airfield far beyond the war. They carried them into classrooms, courthouses, boardrooms, and neighborhoods, places that had once been closed to them. They didn't often speak about their wartime service, but when they did, they spoke with quiet, measured pride. They had done something that seemed impossible. They had rewritten history with their courage, their discipline, and their unshakable sense of purpose. The German pilots who once mocked them learned a hard lesson in the skies over Europe. Arrogance and ideology could not stand against skill, teamwork, and relentless precision. Those men who had laughed at the idea of black fighter pilots soon learned to fear the sight of red tails slicing through the clouds. The symbol that had once been dismissed as a curiosity became one of the most respected emblems in the air war. Bomber crews flying deep into enemy territory would scan the skies and breathe easier when they saw red tails above them. To those men, the Tuskegee Airmen were more than an escort, they were guardians. Their presence meant they might live to see another sunrise. And when the war finally ended, and the full record of the Tuskegee Airmen's achievements became public, the laughter was long gone. In its place was silence, respect, and a deep acknowledgement that prejudice had underestimated the wrong men. Their record was extraordinary missions completed, bombers saved, courage proven beyond question. The statistics spoke for themselves, but their true legacy was something numbers could never capture. Today, when we remember the Red Tails, we remember more than medals and mission counts. We remember the young men who climbed into their cockpits with the weight of history pressing on their shoulders, knowing that one mistake might confirm every lie the world told about them. We remember the bomber crews who made it home because of their skill. We remember the ground crews who worked through freezing nights, patching bullet holes, changing engines, and ensuring those planes would rise again with the dawn. Their story is not just about airplanes and battles. It is about perseverance in the face of a world that said no. It is about men who refused to be defined by hate or limited by fear. It is about dignity under pressure, professionalism under fire, and faith in a future they might never see. And the lesson they left behind still echoes today. When the world doubts you, don't waste your breath arguing. Keep your head down. Stay disciplined. Let your excellence speak for itself. The Tuskegee Airmen proved that a steady hand, a loyal heart, and relentless courage can change not only the course of a war, but the course of a nation. The red tails flew into history, and history, humbled and awed, has never forgotten them.